The first light does not creep gently into the mud brick hut. It bursts golden and unrelenting through the reed curtain that hangs in place of a door, spilling warmth and brightness onto your face, as if Ra himself has commanded your immediate awakening. There is no pillow, no softness, no comfort to cling to warm the familiar prickling of worn linen beneath your cheek. A thin mat woven tightly from palm fibers spread across the dusty floor like a ceremonial offering to discomfort. You do not sigh. Sighing is a luxury for those who do not need to rise before the roosters. And yours have been crowing since the stars began to fade. The air is already thick, already close, already carrying the earthy smell of Nile silt and the sour traces of sweat that never truly leave your skin. No matter how often you rinse in the river or scrub with sand, you stretch slowly, reluctantly, every joint protesting as if made of carved stone rather than bone and sinew, and sit up in the dim glow, careful not to disturb the sleeping forms of your younger siblings, curled like cats under frayed blankets. Your father has already gone. The stale scent of his barley beer breath lingers in the air. Along with the sharper tang of copper tools he keeps wrapped in a cloth under his bedding. He is a stone hauler on the tomb cruise working west of the river, and though his back curves more each season, he insists on being the first to reach the loading barges. Those day, you are bound for the fields, which means a longer walk, a longer day, and a long silence to fill with your own thoughts, as the others speak little in the early hours. You tie a strip of old cloth around your waist, knotting it twice to keep it from falling as you bend, and lift and walk and sweat and press your feet into worn sandals, though the cracked leather bites your heels. You take the jar of stale water that has been left by the door. There is only enough for you one drink sparingly, not because you wish to, but because you must. The rest will come from the irrigation channels, muddy and teeming with life, but wet and wet is what matters. You step outside, and the dawn air seizes your lungs with its warmth, as if the world has already been awake and waiting for you, judging your lateness in silence. The path to the fields is narrow, pressed between walls of sun-baked clay, each house leaning into the next like weary bodies, huddled for shade. Your neighbors stir in their own rituals of awakening, mothers fetching grain, boys wrestling with goats, a girl grinding flour with the flat stone of her mother's mother's mother. The sounds are low, rhythmic, purposeful, dog barks, but no one stops to quiet it. Life here does not require quiet. It demands movement, and so you move. Past the edge of the village, the air opens wider, the world stretching into flat patches of brown and green, checkerboards of hope divided by canals that reflect the sky like strips of broken mirror. You reach the edge of your assigned plot and kneel beside the canal, plunging your hands into its lukewarm current. Silt clings to your skin, queens of frogs, of rot, of things that should not live but do. Splash it on your face anyway, feeling the grit settle into your pores, feeling yourself come alive only through contact with the world's decay. You rise, adjust your belt, and pick up the wooden hoe left leaning against the date palm. It is your companion, your punishment, your daily proof of existence. Hours pass, the sun climbs, the dirt gives reluctantly beneath your blade. Task as simple as breaking soil becomes a war of attrition. Your sweat mixes with the dust until your arms shine with the same reddish hue as the land itself. Flies swarm your eyes, your stomach growls, but there is no food until the overseer permits it, and he has not yet come. You keep your head down because your father told you long ago that the sky belongs to the gods and the dirt belongs to men. And a wise man does not waste his strength gazing at what he cannot touch. When the overseer does arrive, his shadow falls across you like a bad omen. He says nothing at first, just watches. Then he taps his staff against the soil and nods once, a silent judgment. You may continue. You always continue. The midday rest is brief, a moment stolen in the shade of a tamarisk tree, shared with two others from your crew who speak only in grunts and chews. The bread is coarse, hard as fired clay, made days ago and stored in a basket that still smells of fish. You eat because you must. The afternoon brings more heat, more bending, more splinters in your hands, more bruises on your knees. The Nile glints in the distance, mocking you with its endless motion. While you remain still in your labor, a speck on a canvas too large to see. When at last the call is given, when tools are downed and shoulders sag with the blessed ache of completion, you walk home slowly, your feet dragging through the dust like broken oars. You do not speak. Your tongue is heavy with thirst. But as the sun sinks, painting the world in amber and blood, you feel the strange comfort of repetition, the knowledge that tomorrow will be the same, and the day after, and the day after that. There is no freedom in this cycle, but there is familiarity. Familiarity is the closest thing to peace a laborer can afford. You arrive at your home as darkness gathers like a curtain drawn by unseen hands. Your siblings are already curled in sleep, the air inside warmer than the air outside. You lie down, you stare at the roof. The mud brick above you is cracked, the stars beyond invisible, but you feel their pull all the same. You close your eyes. You do not dream. In Egypt, the gods dream for you. There is no sunrise in the quarry, not in the way one imagines it when dreaming of golden light creeping over calm waters or illuminating the fields in hushed reverence. Here, the light arrives without grace, without subtlety, skating like a torrent of molten fire down the rough limestone cliffs, splintering off every jagged edge, sharpening the contours of a landscape already shaped by exhaustion and ambition. You do not see the dawn as beauty. You feel it as heat on your bare shoulders, a steady pulse of energy reminding you that you are alive only so long as you can continue to carry, to pull, to strain your body against the world's heaviest silence. You do not know how many days you have worked in this place. No one does, for the days blur into one another in the sun. Though it rises and sets, offers no true sense of progress, only a reminder that time is passing and you are still here. The quarry does not echo like the temples do. There is no singing here, no chants, no laughter, not the laughter of joy, at least. Only the occasional outburst of madness or sarcasm, too dry to matter, swallowed instantly by dust. Instead, there is the sound of chisels against stone, a rhythmic tapping that grows louder in your ears. The longer it continues, until you are unsure whether it is an external noise or something internal. It's a second heartbeat nested behind your eyes, urging you always onward. You arrive before the overseers do, cause to arrive late is to lose your measure of bread or your jug of water, and those are your lifelines. You tie a cloth around your head, not to cool yourself there. There's no cool but to keep the dust from caking your hair, to prevent it from falling into your mouth as you gasp through each pull of the sled. The stones do not move themselves. They never have. They never will. They lie in wait, inert and eternal, each one taller than a man and heavier than 10 oxen, carved roughly from the bedrock and left to be transported by hands and backs and ropes so thick they leave burn marks on your palms. The sleds are simple wooden frames strengthened by copper bolts and dragged across wet sand that is constantly being doused with water, fetched by younger boys whose job it is to keep the friction slow enough to allow movement but not so wet as to turn the path into a mire. You grip the rope with both hands, your fingers wrapping around it like roots gripping the edge of a cliff, and when the signal is given, a short blast from the overseers horn you heave with everything you have, and the stone does not move. Not yet. It resists. It always resists. You feel the fibers of your being stretch like the ropes themselves. Feel the muscles in your legs scream against your bones, and only then, only after a dozen men lean forward in unison like wheat in a windstorm, does the sled shudder forward, inch by agonizing inch. You do not cry out. You do not groan. You grit your teeth and breathe through your nose, because crying out is a waste of air, and there is never enough air in this place. The sun is already overhead, though it cannot have been more than an hour since the first light struck your face, and you know without looking that your tunic is soaked through with sweat, the linen clinging to your chest like a second skin made of salt. By midday, the stones have been moved only a handful of cubits, and already 2 men have collapsed. They are carried to the shade, fanned with palm fronds, by boys too young to haul, but old enough to know that every worker matters when the pharaoh's tomb must be completed. The supervisor's men who carry staffs and wear gold around their wrists, though they never lift a hand to the stones themselves, circled like hawks, noting progress, whispering to one another in tones too soft to catch. You know what they say. You've heard it before. The schedule must be met. The God King demands completion. Delays are punishable. Lives are expendable. And yet, there is a strange pride in the suffering, a pride born not of honor, but of endurance. You know the temple being built will stand for centuries, perhaps forever. Carved with the names of kings and gods, but erected by hands like yours, backbones like yours, sweat like yours. You imagine your soul one day rising above the finished tomb like a wisp of incense, watching priests pour libations over stones you once dragged through sand, watching tourists and nobles gaze upward in awe, never knowing that it was your hands-cracked, bloodied, hardened that brought this impossible vision into being. No one will speak your name, but your labor will endure. The break, when it comes, is hardly a reprieve. You are given a half loaf of barley bread, dense and sour, in a bowl of lentil mash that sticks to your fingers like wet clay. The water is warm and faintly metallic, stored in clay jars that have been used so many times the glaze has worn away. You sit in the shadow of a half-carved obelisk, the stone still attached to the bedrock like a child not yet weaned from its mother. Others lie back and stare at the sky, which is a pale blue smear broken only by the circling shapes of vultures, always watching, always patient. You eat with your hands, drink with the eyes closed, and try not to think of how many stones remain. You try not to count the days since you last saw your wife, your children, your home. When the break ends, the sun has only grown crueler. The sand beneath your feet feels molten, and the ropes now leave welts as you pull. You lose all sense of time, of identity, even of self. You become motion, you become breath, you become willpower embodied. Your only enemy is collapse. You watch others fall and do not stop, because to stop is to fail, and to fail is to disappear. You do not want to disappear. Not yet. Evening brings a fading of light, but not of heat. The stone you were assigned to has moved perhaps 20 paces all day. It's considered good progress. Supervisors nod. A foreman claps you on the back and hands you a small jar of date wine, fermented and thick, a reward so rare you stare at it before drinking. It's to remember what pleasure looks like. It burns your throat. It fills you with a warmth that isn't from the sun. For a moment, you almost smile. The walk back to the workman's village is long, your feet tracing familiar grooves in the dirt. The sky burns orange and red behind the cliffs. The quarry shrinks behind you, but its weight lingers in your muscles, in your bones, in your dreams. You return to your dwelling, a shared stone hut near the worker as Peasant collapse onto the mat without undressing. Someone hums a lullaby off-key, out of habit. You close your eyes. The sound of chisels still rings in your ears. You will hear it again tomorrow. You will hear it forever. Sleep comes slowly. It always does. You do not fight it. In the quarry, even sleep feels like labor. The work of the living is loud, but the work of the dead is quiet. So quiet, in fact, that it seems at times the walls themselves lean in to listen. Here, within the thick coolness of the embalming house, time unspools differently, slowed by incense, by ritual, by the dense perfume of myrrh and natron that clings to your skin long after you VA stepped into daylight. You do not enter this place casually. You must be called, chosen. Even the apprentices, like you, are not simply workers. They are custodians of transition, guardians of sacred thresholds. You do not merely clean bodies. You prepare souls for eternity. Your day begins not with the rising of the sun, for Ra's blazing eye is no longer your master. Instead, your schedule is set by decay, by the knowledge that flesh spoils, and the soul hovers only so long before wandering. The body has already arrived, wrapped in rough linen, eyes veiled, mouth sealed. You do not ask who he was. Status means nothing here. Pharaoh or potter, merchant or soldier, all arrive naked beneath their wrappings, and all are treated with the same solemn order of operations. You begin by washing the skin in palm wine astringent and bitter and, then in Nile water fetched before dawn, cold and heavy with silt. The smell of the river lingers even after cleansing, a faint, muddy sweetness like the memory of life refusing to let go. Your hands do not shake. They cannot. Telidus are watching, and they know every tremor, every faltering grip. You cut a small slit on the left side of the abdomen, not too wide. Is a practiced motion, one you have repeated in your dreams 1,000 times. Through it, you remove the stomach, the intestines, the lungs, and the liver, placing each into its own polished canopic jar. You do not flinch at the wet sounds. You do not react to the smell. Instead, you hum a low, wordless vibration learned from your master, a sound said to soothe both the dead and the living. 8. The heart is weighed. If the deceased was a man of means, there is a priest present to oversee the judgment, reciting passages from the Book of the Dead as the balance sways. If not, you perform it in silence, alone in the flickering lamplight. The heart must be light, unburdened by sin. If it is not, it is returned to the body, still but with prayers stitched into the wrappings, hopes spoken aloud that the gods might forgive what memory forgets. The brain is removed last, not through the back of the skull, as one might expect, but through the nostrils, using a hooked bronze tool that you have polished until it gleams. The process is delicate and precise. Too deep, and you risk puncturing the eyes. Too shallow, and the contents remain. When complete, you tilt the head and let the matter drain, catching it in a reed-lined bowl, later to be burned. You do not speak during this part. No one does. Next comes the drying. The body is packed with natron salts, so fine it feels like powdered glass poured into every cavity, massaged into every fold. It is left to rest in a stone basin for 40 days, covered in linen and sealed from the sun. During this time, you perform rites daily, chanting the names of the soul's 5 parts, Ren, Ka, Ba, Shoit, and IB. These are not merely sounds. They are keys. Each must be spoken correctly, with breath steady and posture respectful, or the soul may forget its name, itself, its purpose in the afterlife. You clean the body again once the drying is complete. The skin is tight now, darkened and leathery. The lips have receded. Nails loosen in their beds. You replace them with gold tips if the family can afford it, or leave them bare if not. You begin the wrapping, starting with the toes, the fingers, the limbs, each digit wrapped individually with strips of linen scented with resin and juniper oil. The layers multiplied dozens upon dozens each, one accompanied by a spell or invocation, muttered quietly, sometimes from memory, sometimes read aloud from papyrus scrolls kept sealed in a stone niche within the wall. Between the layers, you insert amulets, scarabs, ankhs, eyes of Horus, fragments of lapis and faience. Each has meaning. Each offers protection. You place one over the heart, one over the throat, one near the belly. You wrap the head last, tilting it gently so that the face might look upward as if waiting for a divine hand to lift it skyward. The final bandages are tightened, crossed at the chest, then sealed with beeswax and pressed with the stamp of the house of Anubis. When the wrapping is finished, you place the mummy in its coffin. If the family is wealthy, there is a cartonnage mask painted with lapis blue and ochre, gilded with gold leaf. The eyes outlined with black coal to simulate eternal watchfulness. The family is poor. The coffin is plain wood, perhaps with a single line of hieroglyphs etched into the lid. Either way, you close it slowly, reverently, pressing both palms against the wood as the final prayer is spoken. You do not mourn the dead. You do not pity them. To die is to enter eternity, and eternity is not to be feared. Dead, but you do feel a weight of solemnity that clings to you like smoke. You wash your hands in lotus water. You cleanse your body with oil. Still, the scent of death never leaves you entirely. It follows you into the street, into your sleep, into your breath. At night, you dream of the desert, of jackals with golden eyes, of staircases that lead into the stars, of rivers that flow backward. You wake with the taste of natron in your mouth and the feeling that someone is watching you, even when you are alone. This is part of the work. This is the cost. You carry it with you like a second soul. The embalming house is never truly empty. Even when the bodies are gone, even when the candles have burned low and the chants have ceased, there is a silence that hums like a distant drum, as though the walls themselves are remembering every name ever spoken within. You are not afraid. You are only tired. You lay down your tools, wrap them in cloth, and extinguish the lamps one by one. The last flame sputters, and for a moment, everything is perfectly still. You close the door behind you. The desert wind is warm. Somewhere behind the dunes, a new body is already on its way. To the common man, the life of a scribe appears elevated, almost luxurious a station defined by shaded chambers and silky papyrus. A life far removed from sun-cracked stone and back-breaking labor. They see your hands, not calloused but ink-stained, your spine not bowed by bricks but stiffened by posture. Your body clothed in linen that is crisp, clean, unblemished by mud or sweat. You do not haul stone. You do not reap grain. You do not bear water under the eye of the sun. And yet, as you sit again before your slanted writing board, the thin reed brush between your fingers and the smell of black pigment rising like incense from the ink palette. You understand the truth that others do not tours is a labor of endless repetition, a fatigue not of the body, but of the mind, a life weighed down not by tools, but by expectation, duty, and silence. The day begins long before the palace stirs, while the guards still pace in half-light, while the kitchen boys yawn over clay ovens, and even the river itself still looks half asleep. You are already seated in your chamber, your scrolls unrolled before you, like snakes awaiting charm. You work by lamplight at first, the flame flickering as your brush dances over line after line of formal address, ceremonial praise, grain inventory, border reports, tax assessments, funeral decrees, divorce, filing, siege, word, sacred, each stroke deliberate. The letters must be perfect, not because anyone will read them with care, but because imperfection implies disrespect toward your superiors, okay? Toward the gods, toward Ma'at herself, that cosmic balance you were raised to serve. You were not born into this role. No one is. You were chosen, plucked from your peers at the temple school when you first showed that your eye could follow a falcon S-wing across a line of text, that your hand could hold steady through hours of dictation without wavering. You learned the script the way a dancer learns rhythm, the way a soldier learns the weight of his weapon through repetition so relentless that the forms became instinct. You mastered hieratic, then hieroglyphs, then demotic. You copied the sayings of Tehotep 100 times. You memorized proverbs that praised the quiet tongue and the obedient hand. You were told over and over that to be a scribe was to have life, and you believed it. But life, you now know, is not freedom. Your chamber may be shaded, but the walls are close. Your desk may be orderly, but it is always full. You are summoned constantly to the treasurers, the priests, the provincial governors, anyone who needs a letter composed, a ledger reviewed, a report corrected. You carry your ink set as a soldier carries his blade. You arrive, bow, write, and depart. You are needed, yes, but never quite trusted. You are intelligent, and that makes you dangerous, and so you smile politely. You keep your eyes down. You write what is asked and nothing more. Your duties are endless. You translate trade tallies from Nubian expeditions into temple archives. You transcribe legal decisions from city courts into royal records. You draft praise poems for officials you barely know, carefully repeating their titles and triumphs in language so elevated it rings hollow in your ears. On festival days, you write hymns that will be sung by others while you remain behind, editing temple donation lists. On days of mourning, you record the names of the dead on strips of linen to be wrapped around the body before burial. Your words are everywhere, but your voice is nowhere. Meals come late. You eat in solitude. Lentils, dried figs, a wedge of bread, and, if you are lucky, a bit of goat cheese wrapped in leaves. You eat quickly, not from hunger, but to return before being noticed. Your superiors are kind enough soft-spoken men with soft hands and sharp memories. They will not raise their voices, but they will remember if you are late. They will remember if your brush slipped, if a symbol was out of proportion, if a document was filed in the wrong archive niche. They will not punish you, but you will not be promoted. Your scrolls will be reviewed more closely. Your presence will be noticed too much or too little. And slowly, subtly, you will disappear from the path of advancement and settle into the long hallway of respectable anonymity. Sometimes, in the late hours, you copy sacred text not for any official reason, but for yourself. You find an unused sheet of papyrus, dip your brush, and write verses from the book of Coming Forth by Day, or fragments of hymns to Thoth, the scribe god, the besetted guardian of divine knowledge. You write not to believe, but to remember. To remember why you began. To remind yourself that there is more to your craft than grain counts and reprimands. That once, long ago, writing was a kind of magic, a way of speaking with the divine, of preserving truth against the sands of time. The sun sets slowly across the river, casting long, golden streaks through the shuttered windows of your office. The city below begins to change. Torches lit, markets closing, voices softening. You gather your tools with ritual care brushes, cleaned, ink jars sealed, scrolls rolled tight and bound with cord. You press your seal into the clay closure of the wicker chest and hand the key to the clerk. You bow. You say nothing. You walk home alone. Your house is small, but tidy. It's a single room with a reed mat, a low stool, a shelf of scrolls you have read a dozen times. You light a lamp. You write in your private journal a few lines about the day, about the heat, about the strange expression the governor wore when reading the new tariffs. You wonder what will change, what will come next. Probably nothing. Things rarely change. You sip a cup of warm beer. You stretch your back. You pray briefly, half-heartedly, mostly from habit, and then you sleep. But even in sleep, you dream of ink lines you forgot to correct, of symbols you drew backward, of documents misplaced. You wake with the taste of parchment in your mouth, in the shape of hieroglyphs behind your eyes. You rise before the sun again, because to be a scribe is to be unseen and essential. It is to carry knowledge like a burden. It is to give voice to others while remaining forever silent. Long before he was known as Akhenaten, long before the temples fell silent and the images of Ammon were chiseled from the walls, long before his name was banished and his body lost beneath the sands, he was a quiet boy in a house filled with gods. His name was Amenhotep, fourth of his name, born into a palace lined with limestone and echoing with the footfalls of priests, scribes, guards, and servants. The son of Amenhotep, the third one of the richest, most opulent kings in Egypt's long history, and Queen Tai, a woman of Nubian descent. His intellect and strength were whispered about even among the foreign diplomats that gathered like locusts in Thebes. He was not meant to rule. Oh, if he was, no one seemed to say it aloud. There was an older brother, a prince, beloved by the temples, handsome and strong, trained in the martial arts and rituals of rule. But the gods, as always, had their own plans. The brother died how? No one remembers. A fever, perhaps. Or a fall from a chariot. Oh, something darker, lost in the folds of royal gossip. So Amenhotep the younger was thrust forward, pale, reclusive, awkward. His features, unlike his father's, narrow face, elongated head, delicate limbs. Even as a child, he moved strangely like a reed in windless air, never hurried, never still. He spoke rarely, but wrote often. He preferred the courtyards of the lesser temples to the grandeur of the palace. He watched the sun with a kind of longing, not the way children gaze upward in awe, but the way a thirsty man stares at water, quietly, urgently, with need. The gods surrounded him, hundreds of them, each with their own priesthood, each with shrines, offerings, rituals. Family descendants of the great Aman, king of the gods, funded these temples lavishly. Gold flowed from Nubian mines and Syrian tributes into the mouths of stone idols. The priests of Ammon had grown fat with power. They rivaled even the pharaoh in influence. And perhaps it was this that began the fracture in his young mind. Amenhotep watched as his father, adored as the dazzling sun disk, elevated himself to the level of the gods. He declared himself divine, had temples built in his honor while he still lived. He married foreign princesses by the dozens and covered thieves in monuments of himself, smiling eternally. The boundary between human and divine had grown thin, and the young prince walked that narrow space with curiosity and caution. He began to dream strange dreams. He wrote in his private journals, now lost but once quoted by scribes, that he had visions of a single god, not a falcon-headed warrior, not a jackal or an ibis or a crocodile, no animal form at all, a shape without shape, a god without face, just light, just warmth, just the sun. Aten, not the old Ra, not the composite sun gods of dynasties past. Aten was the disk itself, the rays that touched every living thing. Keen in his dreams, Aten spoke, rather radiated, and what it said was always the same. I alone am the giver of breath. The boy grew. He married a Princess Nefertiti, whose name meant the beautiful one has come, and she was beautiful, strong-willed, elegant, intelligent, a true match for his strangeness. They were rarely apart. Some said she was more than his wife, his priestess, his mirror, his co-ruler in all but name. And then his father died, and the throne passed to the boy no one expected, the boy who stared too long at the sun, who whispered the name of a god no one prayed to, who frowned when the priests chanted too loudly, and everything began to change. He was crowned Amenhotep IV, but the name did not last long. He did not rule as his father had. He did not give wealth to Amon's temples. He did not build monuments to his ancestors. He began closing sanctuaries. He began commissioning new hymns. He called for open courtyards rather than shadowed halls. He began to erase not just customs, but gods. And then came the name Akhenaten, effective for the Aten. He was no longer a boy of many gods. He was the servant of one. It began with a walk through the sand. Akhenaten stood before the vast, open plain temples. No tombs, no roads, no memory. Just the curve of the desert, rising like a wave against the blue horizon. This place had no history. That was its virtue. Was untouched by Amen, unseen by priests, unclaimed by the dead. Only the Aten watched it, bathing it in golden silence. And Akhenaten spoke, Here we shall build. The name would be Akhenaten, horizon of the Aten. He did not want to rule from Thebes, that city so thick with temples it could barely breathe. He did not want to share space with gods who wore animal heads and demanded offerings of blood and bread. He wanted a new beginning, a city for the light, a capital for the one God, a place of purity, of geometry, of sun and stone and nothing else. His court looked on in silence. His advisors murmured among themselves, but none dared refuse. He was Pharaoh, and more than that, he was becoming something else, something between man and God, a living conduit for the solar breath. His words had weight beyond politics. They shimmered with divine urgency. So the orders went out. The architects sketched their lines into the sand. The laborers arrived by the thousands, dusty and confused, bearing hammers, baskets, and copper chisels. The first stones were dragged across the dunes. The Aten blazed down, fierce and impartial. The sun burned the backs of the workers as they shaped limestone into pylons, courtyards, columns, and homes. But this was not to be a city like Thebes. Akhenaten designed it to be open. Wide streets, broad plazas, no towering pylons to cast shadows, no roofed sanctuaries to trap incense in darkness. Temples were to be roofless, exposed, naked beneath the sky, so that the rays of Aten could descend directly upon the altars. Windows faced east. Walls sloped low. The city was aligned not to the Nile, not to the compass, but to the path of the sun itself. This was not architecture, it was theology in stone. And at the heart of it all was the great temple of the Aten, its central altar laid bare beneath the full glare of daylight. No statue stood within, because Aten had no face, no form, no idol, only light, only warmth, only radiance. The royal palace was built close by, linked to the temple by a ceremonial bridge. From this bridge, Akhenaten and Nefertiti could appear each morning, hand in hand, as the embodiment of divine harmony. They were not simply rulers now. They were the chosen vessels of the Aten's light. The king and queen were always depicted with their children beneath the solar disk, its long arms ending in tiny hands that offered Ankh symbols of life to the royal family alone. The city grew with impossible speed. Bureaucrats, soldiers, merchants, artists all were ordered to relocate. Those who hesitated were removed from office. Those who defied were erased from records. Scribes chiseled new oaths into stone. Loyalty not to a man, not to the pantheon, but to the Aten and his son Akhenaten. Cana, the old gods were not just ignored, they were erased. Their names were scraped from walls, their statues defaced, their temples left to crumble in the sun. In this new city, history itself had been reset. For the artists of Akhenaten, everything changed. No longer bound to the rigid formulas of divine perfection, they were told to paint life as it was. Royal scenes showed Akhenaten and Nefertiti in intimate, unexpected moments, kissing their children, sharing food, reclining beneath trees. The king's body was not idealized. He was drawn with a long neck, narrow chest, wide hips, and swollen belly. Some whispered he was sick. Others said it was symbolism that he carried both masculine and feminine principles, a divine duality made flesh. His enemies quiet, for not called it madness, and yet there was beauty in the city. The Nile shimmered along its eastern flank. The cliffs stood sentinel to the west. The open courts rang each morning with hymns to the Aten. The great hymn, probably written by Akhenaten himself, was sung by the priest and echoed through the air like breath returning to the sky. Splendid you rise, O living Aten, eternal Lord of life, you fill every land with your beauty. When you set, darkness falls. When you rise, the world lives. This was not merely poetry, it was policy. The city was a living hymn, a ritual made permanent, a sculpture of sunlight. But the glory was thin. Beneath the gleam, cracks formed. The court was increasingly isolated. Foreign envoys arrived, but were received coldly. The army, deprived of funding, grumbled. The priests of the old gods, stripped of power, conspired in silence. The people of Akhenaten grew tired of ceremonial rigidity. The heat never abated. The open streets baked. The Nile's blessings were erratic. Famine whispered through the grain stores. Akhenaten, he withdrew. More and more, he secluded himself in the inner sanctum of the palace. His appearances grew rare, his orders more absolute, more abstract. He spoke less of Egypt and more of eternity. He meditated for hours in the sun. He scribbled verses in the margins of state documents. He insisted that the Aten alone governed the universe, that he alone heard its voice. Even Nefertiti, once inseparable from his side, began to vanish from the records. And then something happened. What exactly is unknown, but the royal family broke. Nefertiti disappeared. One of their daughters died. Some say a plague swept through the city. Some say dissent boiled into civil unrest. But Akhenaten did not speak of it. He did not mourn publicly. He simply faded. His image on the walls grew thinner, less frequent. His hands stretched ever farther toward the sun, as though trying to leave the earth entirely. He had built a city for a god. But gods do not dwell long among men. By the 12th year of his reign, Akhenaten's golden dream was dimming. The city he had raised from Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten stood, shimmering and silent beneath the blazing Egyptian sun. It was beautiful, yes, in its strange and open geometry, its roofless temples and sun-drenched courtyards, its scenes of royal tenderness carved into crisp, white limestone. But it was also brittle, unsustainable, alone. The people whispered of drought, of famine. The Nile had failed in its floods more than once, and with each year, the harvest thinned. The warehouses were watched more closely. Grain prices rose. Hunger bit into the homes of laborers and servants. And through it all, Akhenaten did not act. He did not ride with his army. He did not inspect the fields. He did not visit the villages to hear their prayers. Instead, he remained in the heart of the palace, behind shaded walls, painted with golden rays and pale daughters. He wrote hymns, stared into the sun until his eyes watered. He received only the most devout. He trusted only the Akhenaten himself. The government faltered. Akhenaten had never been interested in administration. He had placed power in the hands of officials, chosen more for piety than skill. The old families had been alienated. The priests of Ammon, once humbled, were now quietly rebuilding their power in distant Thebes. Even abroad, Egypt's influence was weakening. Letters poured in from foreign governors' desperate pleas for military aid. Warnings of rebellion, cries for gold and soldiers, but few were answered. Diplomatic tablets from the Amarna archive, buried and rediscovered thousands of years later, show these cries. My king, my son, why have you not sent troops? My city is lost. The enemies grow stronger. Do you not hear our suffering? Akhenaten did hear, but he did not listen. To him, the world outside Akhenaten, the chaos of war, the politics of tribute, the petty squabbles of vassal kings was a distraction. He believed in cosmic harmony, in light, in the Aten's universal gaze. He believed that if he aligned himself with that divine principle, all would resolve itself in time. He saw disorder not as a threat to Egypt, but as a failure of belief. But Egypt could not live on sunlight alone. And in the palace, his family was unraveling. Nefertiti, once his equal, his co-ruler, his radiant partner in both ritual and rule, was suddenly absent. Her name vanished from inscriptions. Her face ceased to appear beside his on-temple walls. Whether she died, was exiled, or withdrew herself in protest, no record explains. Some scholars believe she may have changed her name and continued ruling in disguise. Others suspect she simply left, unwilling to watch the dream collapse. Of their 6 daughters, several died young. Scenes from the tombs show Akhenaten and Nefertiti mourning, holding tiny, lifeless bodies, weeping beneath the Aten's rays. Disease, perhaps, or heartbreak, or both. The city had been meant as a new Eden, a world reborn in light, but it had become a mausoleum of children. And Akhenaten, he grew thinner, more gaunt, more abstract. His portraits from this period stretched the bounds of realism. His limbs lengthen, his face becomes sunken, almost alien. His body droops like melted wax. King, who once kissed his daughters and stood proudly in the light, now seemed barely humming somewhere between angel and corpse. The palace grew quieter, the court thinned, the city stilled. And then, sometime around year 17 of his reign, Akhenaten died. No great funerary ceremony is recorded, no grand tomb discovered, no preserved mummy identified with certainty. He vanished, much as he had lived, mysteriously, defiantly, leaving behind a world half built and half broken. Who ruled after him is unclear. Some claim a figure named Smink, possibly a son, a brother, or Nefertiti, in male disguise, took the throne briefly. Others say the transition was chaotic, with factions scrambling for control. But within just a few short years, the city of Akhenaten was abandoned, its streets emptied, stones dismantled and reused, its temples defaced. As the great hymn of the Aten fell silent, the old gods returned. The boy king Tutankhaten's son, or stepson of Akhenaten, was crowned. His name soon changed to Tutankhamun, in honor of Amun, the god his father had tried to erase. The temples of Karnak reawoke with chants. The priests reclaimed their power, and edicts were issued to wipe Akhenaten's name from history. He was labeled a heretic, a madman, a failed ruler. His statues were smashed, his monuments destroyed. Hey, his name omitted from king lists. The city he built became a quarry. Hay's tomb, if ever finished, was hidden or repurposed. Hay was erased from memory with a thoroughness unique even among pharaohs, and yet Hay remained. Buried in the sand, the city of Akhenaten lay preserved like a fossil of sunlight. The art, the letters, the walls all waited silently. And centuries later, when archaeologists brushed away the dust, they found not a madman, but a mystery. A man who saw something different, who believed, for a moment, that the divine could be distilled into light, who loved his family, worshipped the sun, and tried however strangely to shape the world around that single, blinding truth. Akhenaten did not last, but his shadow remains. He was meant to be forgotten. When Akhenaten died, and the last rays of Aten faded from the alabaster walls of Akhenaten, his successors moved with astonishing swiftness. Statues were torn from pedestals, reliefs were scraped away. Temples that once pulsed with hymns to the solar disk were silenced and stripped bare. Egypt, that ancient kingdom of memory, turned its back on the most radical king it had ever known, and it worked at least for a time. Within just a few decades, his city had vanished beneath the drifting sands. His name had been chiseled out of official records, his lineage disrupted, his reforms undone. The traditional gods of men, Osiris, Horus, Isis, Thoth were restored, their temples rebuilt, their priests empowered. Egypt healed itself not by remembering Akhenaten, but by erasing him. Official king lists skipped his name entirely. Histories passed over his reign in silence. To the priests of Karnak, to the bureaucrats of Memphis, to the tomb carvers of the Valley of the Kings, he had simply ceased to exist. And yet, history is stubborn. It buries, but it never truly forgets. Centuries passed, dynasties rose and fell. The sands shifted, the hieroglyphs faded. Even Egypt itself would be conquered, first by Persians, then Greeks, then Romans. The names of her pharaohs echoed dimly in foreign tongues. The gods of Egypt were reduced to curiosities in libraries far from the Nile, and Akhenaten, Akhenaten, who had once dared to remake the divine order, became nothing more than a ghost. Until the 19th century, the rediscovery began with pieces, a carved face in a museum, a broken statue in a private collection, letters translated, and dusty found near a site called Tel El Amarna, which no one could quite explain. The land was barren, the ruins unfinished. There were named strange names like Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhaten, and a mysterious god called Aten. Then came the decipherment of hieroglyphs. Then came excavation, and slowly, like sun rising over a forgotten horizon, Akhenaten returned. What archaeologists found defied every expectation. At Tel El Amarna, they uncovered an entire city frozen in time homes with furniture still intact. Streets with clear outlines, walls covered in the most delicate and unusual reliefs. It was not just the beauty that struck them, but the difference. The art was unlike anything else in Egypt. The figures were fluid, expressive, emotional. The scenes showed intimacy. The pharaoh with his children, Nefertiti smiling, hands stretched toward the glowing sun disk. It was as though the soul of an entirely different civilization had been buried in the middle of the Nile, and at its center was Akhenaten, the man, the king. He came into focus gradually. First, as a figure of curiosity, why was he drawn with such exaggerated features? Why had he banished the other gods? Why build a whole city for a sun god with no temple roof? Then, as a point of controversy, scholars argued fiercely over his motives. Was he a religious zealot, proto-monotheist, a visionary mystic, a megalomaniac? His writings, especially the great hymn to the Aten, a deep spiritual sensitivity. Some compared him to Moses. Others called him the first individual in history. The truth, as always, is more complicated. His body was never found. There were candidates' mummies unearthed in tombs labeled with cryptic markings. Bones with elongated skulls, remains hastily interred in reused sarcophagi. Some tests suggested royal lineage, perhaps even kinship with Tutankhamun, the famous boy king who had reversed his father's reforms, but no conclusive identification emerged. His wife, Nefertiti, remained equally enigmatic, her beauty immortalized in the famous Berlin bust. Her role as queen and possibly pharaoh still the subject of endless speculation. Did she rule after Akhenaten's death under another name? Did she die in disgrace? Was she buried in a secret chamber, yet undiscovered? The mystery deepened, and with the mystery came myth. To modernize, Akhenaten has become a mirror each generation, seeing in him what it needs to see. The Romantics imagined him as a tragic poet king, doomed by his ideals. The early 20th century admired his bold break from tradition, calling him a reformer ahead of his time. In religious studies, he is sometimes cited as the world's first monotheistic forerunner to Abrahamic prophets. In psychology, he is seen as the first ego in history, someone who stepped beyond collective tradition to express a personal vision of the divine. Yet, despite all this, there is something haunting about Akhenaten's rediscovery. He is there and not there. We know his face, but not his thoughts. We have his city, but not his tomb. We hear his voice in hymns, but do not know to whom he prayed when his children died. He is always just beyond our reach. Like the sun, he worshipped, visible, warming, brilliant, but untouchable. In a way, he succeeded. He wanted to be remembered, not as a man of war, not as a conqueror or builder of tombs, but as the vessel of a single truth. That there is beauty in light, that the sun sustains all, and that even the briefest touch of divinity can reshape a civilization. And though his name was erased, though his city was forgotten, though his bones lie lost beneath the shifting sands, Akhenaten still rises each morning in the east, with the light, with the heat, with the eternal gaze of the Aten. You are standing on the edge of the desert, just as the night gives way to the first gold blush of morning. Before you, the landscape is still and vast low hills, wind-scoured stones, and the distant shimmer of what was once a city. Nothing moves, not a whisper of wind, not a single echo of life. This is Amarnanesian Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten, and beneath your feet lie tombs that, according to ancient Egyptian religion, should never have been built. For 3,000 years, Egyptians buried their dead in the West. It was a rule so fundamental, so woven into their concept of the universe, that it rarely needed to be stated. The West was where the sun died each day, where it descended into the underworld, where the journey of the soul began. The Valley of the Kings, the royal necropolises, tombs of nobles and scribes, all west of the Nile, all facing eternity through that symbolic descent. But Akhenaten changed that. When he moved the capital to Akhenaten, he not only declared a new city and a new god, he declared a new relationship to death. The necropolis of Amarna was built in the east, beneath the rising sun. The tombs, instead of pointing toward the darkness of the Doyet, gazed toward the light. It was theological defiance, carved in stone. And yet the tombs themselves, the ones still visible today, have buried in sand and silence there some of the most enigmatic and unfinished in Egyptian history. Let us descend into them. There are two major clusters of tombs at Amarna, the North Tombs and the South Tombs, both carved into cliffs flanking the city. These were meant for high-ranking officials, priests of the Aten, stewards of Akhenaten's strange new world. Many were left incomplete, the rush of political collapse freezing them in mid-chisel. But those that remain reveal an astonishing mix of traditional funerary architecture and radical new thought. You enter the tomb of Merira, high priest of the Aten. The first chamber is cool and quiet, the walls etched with graceful figures. There is no Osiris here, no Anubis weighing hearts, no book of the dead. Instead, the sun Discaten reigns supreme, its long, delicate rays ending in tiny hands that bless the royal family. Akhenaten and Nefertiti appear constantly larger than life, standing in place of gods. The priest's own image is tiny, almost humble, always shown in adoration of the king and queen. This is not the tomb of a man who imagined his own divine reward. This is the tomb of a servant one whose entire afterlife is imagined through proximity to Akhenaten and his light. And yet, traces of older traditions cling like shadows. False doors are carved. Offering tables are marked. Inscriptions include prayers not just to Aten, but to Ra Horatia's subtle nod to solar deities of old. It is as if the artists, though commanded to serve a new god, could not fully forget the old ways. You move deeper. In tomb after tomb almost, Pintu Tutuyu, see the same pattern. Magnificent entryways, detailed scenes of sun worship and royal grace. But deeper chambers remain uncut. Sarcophagi are missing. In some cases, burials never even occurred. And then there is the royal tomb itself, hidden further east, across a dry, twisting wadi. This was to be Akhenaten's final resting place. It is massive, with long corridors and side chambers carved deep into the rock. One chamber is believed to have held the body of one of his daughters, likely Akhenaten, shown in poignant reliefs being mourned by her parents beneath the rays of Atan. Another chamber, perhaps, was meant for Nefertiti, for the king himself, but it was defiled, smashed in antiquity, its artifacts shattered, its sarcophagus vandalized, its contents looted or erased. It is possible Akhenaten was never buried here at all, or if he was, his body was later removed, perhaps by loyalists seeking to protect him, or by enemies seeking to desecrate his legacy. Strangely, while the tomb lacks the grandeur of the Valley of the Kings, it does contain something unique. Scenes of grief. It's unfiltered, almost intimate grief. Unlike the formal funerary reliefs of earlier pharaohs, these walls show the king and queen weeping over the body of their child. Their heads are bowed. Their hands cover their faces. There are no protective spells, no stern gods with jackal heads, only raw emotion carved in the stillness of stone. So what kind of religion allows its gods to weep? Okay? What kind of king allows himself to mourn? And what kind of afterlife does one imagine in a city without death? For that is the paradox of Amarna, a city bathed in divine sunlight, built by a man who denied the traditional vision of the afterlife, fanned yet full of tombs. Tombs that should not exist, burials that were never completed, and bones that may never be found. As the wind picks up outside, carrying the dry whisper of sand across empty paths, you realize this was not just a city. It was a thought experiment in stone, a theological gamble, a sacred dream carved into cliffs that crumble even now. And yet, like the sun, it rises again in Memoria's day. We speak his name. Akhenaten, Merira, Meketaten. The tombs remain silent, unfinished, waiting. It is a quiet evening in Akhenaten, and the sun god and judge of all has slipped behind the eastern cliffs. The light is gone, and with it, the comfort of Aten's presence. The city is still. The broad avenues are empty. The altars have cooled, but within the shadows of hastily cut chambers, a very old fear has returned. Someone has died. Okay. And that is a problem, because the city of Akhenaten was not meant for the dead. It was built for light, for life, for the sun god who neither slept nor died, but simply cycled through eternity on his celestial bark. Akhenaten's theology was revolutionary in its simplicity. Aten did not descend into the underworld. There was no Duat beneath the world's skin. Okay? There was no Osiris waiting with his feather and scales. Aten was present, visible, singular and eternally alive. So what, then, did his followers do when death came? They were not prepared. When plague struck the royal court, likely during Akhenaten's 12th year, priests, scribes, and even members of the royal family began to die in alarming numbers. Inscriptions grow scarce. Tombs suddenly show signs of incompletion, abandonment. Reliefs depict mourning, but no gods of death, no promises of rebirth. The people of Amarna were facing something their new religion had not fully explained. What happens when the light disappears and they had no instructions? In older traditions, death was a journey through danger and shadow. Okay? The soul passed gates, battled serpents, and answered divine riddles. It needed amulets, food offerings, and the words of the Book of the Dead to survive. But under Akhenaten, these protections had been discarded. The priests of Ammon were gone. The scrolls burned. The spells banned. The tombs of Amarna contain no magic. It's only praise for the Aten. Only images of Akhenaten. No Anubis, no Mat, no Osiris. And so the people improvised. Archaeological evidence suggests a strange and desperate syncretism, secret burials in makeshift tombs, smuggled amulets with forbidden symbols, rituals whispered in the old tongue when no guards were near. A funerary cone found buried at the edge of the necropolis bore the faint outline of Thoth, scratched faintly beneath an official image of the Akhenaten act of heresy in miniature. In the tomb of Tutu, a high-ranking official, faint traces of the 4 sons of Horus, guardians of the organs in canopic jars, were found, half erased. The artist had begun to carve them, perhaps from habit or private belief, and then stopped, leaving only shadows. This was a world in religious transition, and with transition comes confusion. Even the embalming practices were affected. Akhenaten's regime had centralized many resources in the new capital, but the expertise of embalmers traditionally passed down in Thebes was scattered. Some burials in Amarna show poor preservation, rushed mummification, incomplete organ removal, even bodies simply wrapped and buried with minimal ceremony. It is possible that some commoners were buried without mummification at all, placed in rock-cut shafts in silence. Dust sealed over their remains, their names forgotten by history. But the secrets do not end there. Some scholars believe that even Nefertiti herself, if she survived Akhenaten and ruled under the name Smenkhare, was buried in a hastily prepared tomb, possibly outside of Amarna altogether. There are traces of her name on reused artifacts, inscriptions scratched out, reinscribed, then erased again. It is as if her burial, like her reign, was contested, revered, rejected, and repurposed within a single generation. Then there is the case of Tutankhaten, later known as Tutankhamun, the boy king who reversed his father's religious revolution. His burial in the Valley of the Kings was filled with Amarna artifacts, furniture, goldwork, and ritual items that originally bore Adonis symbols, later hacked away or overwritten with more traditional iconography. Some of the items in his tomb, like his famous golden mask, may have originally belonged to Akhenaten or Nefertiti, altered to suit the new orthodoxy. It is possible, some say, likely that when Amarna was abandoned, bodies were exhumed and reburied in secret. The tombs at the city were never fully looted because many were never fully used. The royals, especially, may have been relocated, buried, not in the city of light they built, but in the west, beneath the shadowed gaze of the old gods they had tried to banish. But why such secrecy? Because in the aftermath of Akhenaten's death, his legacy became toxic. His name was cursed, his memory systematically erased in a process called damnatio memoria. To bury a man in Adonis symbols was to mark yourself as a traitor to the new regime. And so priests, families, even descendants of the Amarna elite began to hide their loved ones, their beliefs, their very memories. They buried the bones with no inscriptions. They left the tombs unmarked. They scratched off names with sharp stones and left the dead anonymous. One site near Amarna, the South Tombs Cemetery, contains over 200 skeletons, almost all of them interred with no grave goods, no identifying marks, no prayers. Most are young. Many show signs of hard labor, malnutrition, and disease. These may have been the workers who built the city, who carved the tombs, who worshipped the light, and were left in darkness when the dream ended. Even now, their faces remain nameless, their stories unread, their gods unknown. There's no mourning ritual left to speak for them, only the wind across the hills, only the slow dust of erosion, only the quiet, persistent presence of their bones beneath the desert. And yet, in a strange way, they succeeded. Because here you are, thousands of years later, speaking their names, wondering at their burials, awakening the memory they were forbidden to carry. In death, they achieved what Akhenaten could not, a legacy beyond dogma, beyond temple, beyond stone. They remind us that the past is not as tidy as we imagine, that even in the most radical revolutions, tradition whispers, and that beneath every sun-worshipping altar, there lies a forgotten tomb, waiting, listening, still warm with memory. You are walking through the palace ruins of Akhenaten as the night wind curls around broken columns and sun-bleached walls. The city is asleep, but beneath your feet, in what was once a quiet room used for records or grain inventory, lay one of the strangest and most precious caches in all of ancient history. They are not golden treasures, not statues, not jewels, not the remnants of divine offerings. They are letters, small, flat clay tablets, cracked, baked, faded, and yet they contain voices, real voices that have traveled 3,000 years to reach us. They are the Amarna letters, over 350 diplomatic documents written in Akkadian, cuneiform, the international language of the late Bronze Age, discovered by accident in 1887 by a peasant woman digging for fertilizer in the ruins of Akhenaten city. Each tablet is a whisper, a message between kings, queens, vassals, and spies. A network of ancient power, recorded with reeds and fired by the sun. The very existence of these letters is astonishing. They survived not because someone preserved them, but because someone forgot them. When Amarna was abandoned, the tablets were simply left in a room and covered by dust. They sat undisturbed for over 3 millennia until the ground gave them up again, and suddenly the silent world of Akhenaten had a voice. And what a voice it was. You crouch beside one of the tablets. It is small, barely the size of your hand, but dense with signs, wedges, hooks, and horizontal strokes pressed into soft clay. This letter, EA4, is from Babylon, addressed to Pharaoh himself. The king of Babylon expresses frustration. He has sent gifts, but received no gold in return. He reminds Pharaoh of their equal status and of the respect owed between great kings. Another tablet, EA9, is more delicate, a marriage negotiation. Babylon wants an Egyptian princess. Pharaoh refuses. Egypt does not send royal daughters abroad. The Babylonian king, confused and slightly insulted, asks why. Is he not equal in power? Are his gods not also mighty? Okay. These letters are filled with careful diplomacy, but also with ego, anxiety, and posturing. They reveal that Akhenaten's Egypt was not a sealed theological bubble. It was part of a dangerous, complex international system, one where tribute, alliances, and royal marriages were exchanged like coins in a game played by gods. Other letters come from vassal kings in the Levant and Syria, petty rulers in cities like Byblos, Megiddo, and Jerusalem. They beg for troops, for weapons, for help against invading enemies. They plead with Pharaoh to remember them. Some are obsequious, calling themselves the dust under your sandals. Others grow frustrated. They report betrayals. They name spies. They send coded threats. One of the most desperate voices is that of Ribadah, the king of Byblos, who sends dozens of letters across years, each more anxious than the last. His city is under siege. His allies are dead. He accuses other vassals of treachery and demands Egyptian military intervention. None comes. Eventually, his letters stopped. We do not know if he died in battle, was overthrown, or simply gave up. The silence says enough. But perhaps the most extraordinary letter is one sent not by a king, but by a queen. Letter EA-23 is a mystery. It comes from a woman who identifies herself as Dukamanso, a Hittite rendering of an Egyptian title, possibly meaning the king's wife. Scholars believe this was Akhenaten, the widow of Tutankhamun, writing after her husband's sudden death. In the letter, she begs the Hittite king Suppiluliuma to send one of his sons to marry her and become king of Egypt. She claims she has no heir, no one to take the throne, and will not marry a servant. This was unprecedented. An Egyptian queen asking a foreign prince to become pharaoh. The Hittite king is suspicious. He sends a delegation. He asks for confirmation. Eventually, he sends his sons in answer, but Zanaz never arrives. Kana, he is murdered en route, almost certainly by Egyptian officials loyal to a rival faction, perhaps Horemheb. Kas-I, who ultimately marries the widow and becomes king. This episode, recorded only in the Hittite archives and obliquely referenced in the Amarna letters, reveals a moment of chaos in Egypt's royal succession, a power vacuum, a foreign plot, and a woman, possibly the last of Akhenaten's bloodline, making a last, desperate move to preserve her position. These letters show us Egypt not as a monolith, but as a vulnerable player on a shifting political chessboard. They show that even during the height of Akhenaten's religious revolution, the world kept turning. Trade continued. War threatened. Spies moved through port cities and border towns, and pharaohs still had to answer for unpaid debts. Today, these letters rest in museums: Berlin, London, Cairo, Nicosia, and Istanbul, carefully translated and cataloged, but still full of echoes. Kaswa, in them we hear the politics beneath the piety, the ambition beneath the incense, the world beneath the sun. They remind us that history is not made in temples alone, but in paperless whispers, desperate requests, and unsent replies. The letters should have crumbled. They should have burned or cracked or vanished beneath the Nile's flood. But they survived, Ka, and in their survival, they speak Ka, and we, thousands of years later, must listen. You are standing at the threshold of a temple, but not one in Akhenaten. This temple is older, grander, hidden in the sacred soil of Thebes, far from the heretical Sun City. Its sandstone pillars are quiet, shrouded in dusk. No hymns to Aten are sung here. The air smells of incense, cool water, and a joled dust. This is the house of Ammon, god of air and kingship, once lord of Egypt's pantheon and now, during Akhenaten's reign, outlawed, defunded, defaced. The priests are still here, waiting, silently, watching, when Akhenaten launched his sweeping religious reforms, declaring Aten the only god and himself the sole intermediary between heaven and earth. He didn't just build a new capital. He declared war on Egypt's traditional religious infrastructure, a powerful cult of Amun-Ra. Its temple complexes had grown rich and politically influential during centuries of pharaonic patronage, was suddenly stripped of power, privilege, and purpose. Temples were closed, statues defaced, inscriptions chiseled away, priests dismissed. The Theban priesthood, once kingmakers, were reduced to relics, their voices suppressed, their god-made taboo. And yet, they endured, because gods in Egypt do not die. Not really. They retreat, they bide their time, and so do those who serve them. While Akhenaten was raising his sun-drenched monuments in the desert, something strange was happening in Thebes and the outlying provinces. Shrines to Amen continued to receive secret offerings. Local officials, especially in Nubia and Middle Egypt, preserved old titles like Priest of Amen on private stelae. Despite the official purge, some buried these inscriptions face down, hidden beneath floorstones, waiting for safer days. In Karnak, deep within the temple's complex maze of chapels and courts, graffiti has been found, scratched hastily but reverently, invoking Amon's protection. These were acts of resistance, not with weapons, but with memory. Amon was not dead. He had simply gone invisible, and so had his priests. Some scholars believe that the priesthood began to act like a shadow network, subtly influencing regional governors, harboring discontent, and even preserving sacred knowledge in hidden libraries. Amulets of Amon and his consort Mut, buried in tombs during the Amarna period, suggest the continued private worship of these forbidden gods, often in direct defiance of royal law. Meanwhile, in Akhenaten's obsession with purity and control began to alienate his own people. With the banning of traditional funerary rites, the people of Egypt were left spiritually unmoored. Without Osiris, without Anubis, without the long familiar spells of the afterlife. Many Egyptians feared they would be lost forever in death. The priesthood had once provided comfort, continuity. Now it was absence and silence. Even within the royal administration, the reforms began to unravel. After Akhenat's death, his successors, Smenkhkare, possibly Nefertiti under a new name, and then Tutankhaten began to reverse course. The young king soon changed his name to Tutankhamun, living image of Amen, and moved the court back to Thebes. This was more than politics. It was a restoration of cosmic balance. The temples were reopened, the priesthood of Amen reinstated. Offerings resumed, but not everything went back to the way it was. The memory of Amarna and the trauma it caused lingered, and the priests of Ammon had learned a lesson. Gods could be challenged, even by kings. And so they grew stronger, wiser, more political. In the generations that followed, the priesthood of Ammon became more powerful than ever. Sometimes even more powerful than the pharaoh himself. By the time of the third intermediate period, high priests of Ammon were effectively rulers of Upper Egypt, commanding wealth, armies, and divine legitimacy. This was their revenge, not through war, but through endurance. They had waited in the dark. They had let the sun pass, and when it did, they stepped out of the shadows and reclaimed what they believed was theirs. Even today, in the remains of Karnak and Luxor, the name of Amen echoes louder than that of Akhenaten. His cartouches were erased, his monuments dismantled, his statues defaced. Meanwhile, Amen's temples were expanded, his priesthood glorified, his rituals revived. But listen closely in the quiet of those columns, in the layers of carved plaster beneath the repainted walls. You can still feel the tension, the scars of a forgotten civil war between gods, where memory battled mandate and silence was as powerful as speech. You can still feel the waiting, the breath held, the faith buried in stone. Because no revolution is permanent, not even one led by the sun. The sun is rising once again over Egypt, but not over the dusty brick homes of commoners, not over the noisy stalls of the market, nor the back-breaking rhythms of the field. This time, it rises over polished stone, over columns of painted limestone, over gardens trimmed with care, and water basins flickering in the morning light. You are awakening in a place of privilege, not a palace, but close. You are not Pharaoh. You are something else, something perhaps more real. You are the vizier, and today, Egypt runs through your hands. The Pharaoh is divine, yes, but he does not count grain. Draft laws, receive reports, inspect temples, or settle land disputes. That is your domain. You are the chief administrator, the head of the civil service, the chief justice, the overseer of public works, the minister of religion, and sometimes even the voice of Pharaoh himself. When he does not wish to speak, you rise with the sun. Your linen robe has been pressed by servants before dawn. A steward brings you a silver bowl with scented water. The makeup around your eyes is applied not for vanity, but for protection. Kohl to block the sun and ward off evil. Eat lightly, figs, bread, honey, and perhaps a sip of wine diluted with water from the sacred canal that flows near your estate. Your villa is part of an estate granted to you by Pharaoh himself. Expansive gardens, tall shade trees, pools of lotus, and breezy verandas. But leisure is not your duty. Duty is what defines you. By mid-morning, you are seated in the Great Hall of Records, where dozens of scribes work in silence. They bend over papyrus scrolls, copying, calculating, cross-referencing. The flow of papyri is endless. Agricultural reports, temple inventories, border complaints, worksite logs, letters from regional governors, requests for materials, and summons for trials. Your role is not simply to read, it is to interpret. To decide what matters and what does not. To determine which voice gets heard and which is left to fade. You are the ultimate filter of reality for the king. At midday, you move to the courts of judgment, where you act as the supreme judge in civil and criminal cases. The court is open air, and citizens from all over Egypt have come to present petitions. 8. You hear a case of land encroachment. A farmer claims his neighbor moved the boundary marker. You hear a complaint from a temple official accusing a lower priest of hoarding grain. You even hear a sensitive matter involving a scribe caught falsifying ration tallies, a serious offense that threatens the moral and cosmic order known as Mat. Mat is more than truth. It is the cosmic principle of balance, order, and justice, and you, as vizier, are its defender. When you pass sentence, you are not simply enforcing laws. You are realigning the world itself. Your decisions echo through families, provinces, and time. And you must be careful. You remember the words of instruction written for your office centuries ago in the vizier's manual. Do not bend justice for the strong, nor deny justice to the weak. Be just, so that Mat may endure in your name. By late afternoon, your duties turn outward. You visit one of the royal tomb construction sites, where hundreds of workers are carving chambers into the Valley of the Kings. You inspect their tools, check the delivery of limestone blocks, and speak with the foreman about the schedule. A delay could mean political embarrassment, or worse. You next stop at a temple treasury, where gold vessels are being cataloged before being melted down for offerings. The temple priests greet you respectfully, but cautiously. You have the authority to audit their accounts. You know some of them resent the fact that you, not they, often determine which shrines receive grain stipends and which are left to decline. Power is not always loud. Sometimes it is in the margins of scrolls. Sometimes in the nod of approval. Sometimes in silence. In the evening, you return home, but the work does not stop. K's, your private office is filled with correspondence, scrolls from other viziers, for there are now two, one for Upper Egypt and one for Lower. Letters from the king's court, updates from the frontier, notes from the chief physician about the health of a regional namarch. You read under oil lamps until the stars are high. Servants wait silently. Musician plays softly in the background, though you hardly notice. Your children are asleep. Your wife, perhaps a noble's daughter, perhaps from a merchant family elevated by royal favor, has already retired. She understands. Kana, this is the life of a vizier. You command more influence than most nobles, more access than any general, more knowledge than many priests. But you are also a target. One misstep, one failed project, one misunderstood order, and you could fall from grace. You have seen it happen. You have read the records of men erased. Names chiseled off monuments, scrolls burned, villas confiscated, so you remain careful, measured, precise, because this is Egypt, and Egypt is not ruled only by pharaohs. It is ruled by scrolls, by routines, by you. The Nile whispers against the embankments as the afternoon heat melts into a golden, honey-colored dusk. The lotus flowers close. The air becomes fragrant with crushed myrrh and cedar oil, and from the courtyard of your villa of many, for you are among the wealthiest in Egypt, laughter floats like perfume into the evening. Musicians tune their lutes, harps, and flutes. Servants adjust garlands of fresh papyrus and roses. Wine is chilled in alabaster jars. The best linen is laid across polished wooden tables. The feast is about to begin. You are a noble of the court, perhaps, a high priest, perhaps a military commander, perhaps the overseer of a southern province, perhaps simply born to land and titles. Your life is not merely about survival or service. It is about the art of living well. And tonight, as in many nights, that art is on full display. But first, you must be prepared. Your bath is drawn with scented oils. A servant silent and efficient washes your arms, legs, and face. Another applies unguents to your skin to keep it supple and fragrant in the dry air. Kohl is drawn carefully around your eyes, not only to protect against glare, but as a signal of status and style. You slip into an exquisitely pleated linen robe, so finely woven it almost glows in the lamplight. Gold bangles encircle your wrists. A beaded collar rests upon your shoulders. Your sandals are stitched from imported leather. This is not vanity. This is ceremony. This is elegance as a public performance. Because tonight is not merely about indulgence. It is about power displayed politely with honeyed words and soft laughter. Your guests arrive at twilight, borne by a boat along the canal that cuts through your estate. Among them are other nobles, dignitaries, temple administrators, scribes of status, and perhaps even a visiting foreign envoy honored with a seat of distinction. You greet them in the garden colonnade, your voice warm, your gaze attentive, your posture effortless. You are not merely a host. Oh, you are a conductor of social harmony. Dinner begins slowly. Platters arrive, one by one roasted duck glazed with pomegranate syrup, spiced lentil stews, honey-drenched cakes, grilled fish served with coriander and garlic, and fresh cucumbers in yogurt and mint. The bread is warm, shaped like birds or symbols of rebirth. Wine is poured, generously and constantly, sometimes flavored with dates or juniper berries. Your servants know the order. They know who receives the first pour, whose cup is never empty, and who prefers only water touched with lotus essence. But it is not the food alone that nourishes this evening. It is the conversation. You exchange pleasantries about the king's latest temple project, about new shipments of lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, about recent reforms in grain taxation. You compliment a guest S-ring, likely a diplomatic gift from Nubior. Inquire after the health of someone as a state steward. It is in these gentle dialogues, these measured compliments, these small but precise courtesies, that alliances are affirmed and rivalries are tested. Music swells around you. A harpist plays an ode to Hathor. Dancers, adorned in semi-transparent linen and golden anklets, move with practiced grace. Their hands speak ancient languages of gesture. Their eyes glance only where they are trained to. Their presence is not entertainment, but ritualized beauty, and you offer them fruit and beads as thanks. You smile with perfect ease, but nothing here is casual. You're watching. Always. You note who drinks too much, who interrupts, who compliments too forcefully, who whispers too long in the ear of another. Every moment in this feast is a text to be read, a scroll of subtle ambition. Because Egypt may be held together by stone and ritual, but it is sustained by reputation, and yours must shine brighter than the lamps. As night deepens, incense coils lazily into the air, and the feast shifts into poetry and song. You recline more fully now. Your feet are washed by servants. Your hands are cooled with damp cloths scented with lavender. A friend recites a love poem written on a piece of finely dyed papyrus in ancient verse, once spoken in the palace of Akhenaten. You listen, not for the words, but for the manner in which they are delivered, and you understand that what is being shared is not just poetry, but trust. Feasts such as these do not appear in chronicles. They are not carved on temple walls, but they shape what happens behind those walls. It is here that future marriages are agreed upon, that temple appointments are softly requested, that decisions are made about which land goes to whom, which family gains favor, and which quietly falls from grace. You have not worked today. You have not lifted, built, or ridden, but you have hosted. And in Egypt, hosting is governance in disguise. By midnight, the feast concludes. Guests are sent home in fine spirits. You remain, watching the lamps burn low, listening to the gentle laughter of your household, feeling the cool stone beneath your hands. A servant wraps a soft shawl over your shoulders. You are not tired. You are fulfilled, because this is your power, not declared, not commanded, simply known. And in the morning, when the Nile stirs again and the scribes record the day, savants and the laborers lift their loads, and the priests light incense for the gods, you will rest, not because you do not work, but because your work was done with wine, silk, and wit. And that, in Egypt, is the most noble art of all. You are not a farmer. You are not a brickmaker, nor a fisherman, nor a soldier. Ku do not bend beneath the sun to cut barley, nor do you stir mud to form crude bricks for a noble's tomb. You are not whipped by overseers, nor cursed by the heat. Your hands are not blistered. They are ink-stained, because you are a scribe, one of the elite few who has learned the sacred skill of reading and writing. And in Egypt, that means power. You began your journey as a boy, seated cross-legged on a floor of hard-baked clay in a quiet classroom nestled in the rear quarters of a temple. There is no ink yet, only a reed stylus and a slab of smooth limestone. Your teacher, an older scribe with deep lines around his eyes and an ever-watchful glare, speaks slowly, repeatedly, without kindness, but with immense discipline. You copy each sign with care, hieroglyphs and hieratic, the shorthand of officialdom. Your fingers ache. You learn the words for grain, ox, pharaoh, offerings, temple, mahat, and punishment. You do not understand them yet, but you will. By age 10, you are memorizing entire texts, not stories, but accounting formulas, royal decrees, ceremonial hymns, legal protocols, instructions for scribes, and the proper salutations to open and close letters to each rank of official. You learn how to sharpen a reed stylus, how to prepare ink from soot and water, and how to hold your brush with poise and flow. You're trained not just in writing, but in the performance of authority. You are told over and over again, the scribe does not carry burdens. He is not struck. He does not toil. He commands by pen, and all others obey. This is not just a school. It is a machine for social mobility, and yet only a very few make it through. By the time you are 15, you are placed in an office, perhaps as a junior clerk to a temple steward, or as an assistant in a tax bureau. You copy inventories, transcribe letters, begin to see the structure of Egypt's entire society laid out before you in scrolls and columns. You are young, but you see everything. You see how land is measured, how taxes are assessed, how temples manage grain silos, how punishments are carried out, how Pharaoh's orders are disseminated and reinterpreted, and sometimes quietly ignored. You understand that to write something is to make it real. A farmer without paper cannot prove his field boundaries. A widow without a will cannot claim her husband's goods. A temple without records cannot collect offerings. A governor without scrolls is merely a man in fine clothes, but you, with a stylus and ink, can shape the truth itself. Years pass, you rise in rank. Your name appears at the bottom of longer and more sensitive scrolls. Eventually, you are placed in charge of an archive, or better yet, a royal scribal bureau. You have apprentices now. You teach them the same rigid forms, the same phrases, the same belief that the scribe's role is sacred. But your world is not confined to dusty storerooms. You are sent on expeditions to measure quarries, to tally livestock, to inspect Nile irrigation systems. You travel by boat, by chariot, always carrying your scribal kit: palette, stylus, water flask, rolls of papyrus. Wherever you go, you are both witness and judge. Your word is law, okay? And in court, your testimony as a scribe overrides others, okay? A farmer may swear by the gods. A soldier may protest his innocence, but the scribe's scroll is what remains in the archives. The ink does not forget, and still, you are more than a bureaucrat. You are the memory of Egypt. It is you who copies the instructions of Tehotep, those ancient proverbs on humility, obedience, and virtue. You who preserves the hymns to Ra, the chants for Osiris, the chronicles of battles, and the pharaoh's glorious deeds. You who records births and deaths, offerings and dreams. Your pen crosses into religion, politics, history, and magic. When a royal tomb is inscribed, your hands write the spells that guide the soul through the duat. When a treaty is signed with foreign kings, it is your handwriting that seals the accord. When Pharaoh wishes to praise or punish, It is you who makes the decree endure. And yet, despite this power, you remain largely invisible to history. You sign few works with your own name. You are a vessel of language, a servant of the state, and a guardian of knowledge. But you always know, that nothing in Egypt moves without the scribe. He does not raise monuments, but he tells the world who built them. He does not fight wars, but he defines who won. He does not speak in court, but he decides who is remembered as just. He does not wear the crown, but he writes the king's name, and names are everything. Even gods are only real once they are written. And so, as night falls, you sit in your chamber, surrounded by papyrus rolls, oil lamps flickering beside you. You write with slow grace, copying sacred texts for the next generation. You sip sweet wine. You hear the distant sounds of the city, laughter, water lapping against a barge, music drifting from a noble's courtyard, and you smile, 'cause though you may not command armies or own estates, your hand moves the future. And when all the others are dust, forgotten, buried, nameless, your script will remain, ink on scroll, truth on paper, memory etched into time. You have lived a full life. Your children thrive. Your lands are bountiful. Your servants are loyal. And your name is spoken with respect in the halls of governance and in the quieter spaces of prayer. But now, even in the midst of summer's bright warmth and the fragrance of blue lotus along the Nile, you begin to prepare not for a journey to another estate, or a voyage upriver, but for the only journey that truly matters, the one beyond this world. Because you are a noble of Egypt, and death, for you, is not an ending. It is a promotion to eternity. Preparations began years quietly, carefully, often even in your youth, while you attended banquets and presided over grain counts. Artisans were already laying the foundations of your eternal home. Your tomb, like the peasant's shallow grave wrapped in linen scraps, or the commoner's clay pot beneath a sycamore. Your tomb would be an echo of life itself, a miniature version of your world, carved in stone and stocked with spells. You have spared no detail. The tomb's walls are aligned with the stars. Its entrance faces the rising sun, ensuring that you too will be reborn each morning in the company of Ra. The chambers are cut deep into the limestone hills, or built in grand mastaba form above the desert sands, depending on the times and the fashion of your dynasty. Within, artisans decorate each surface with pigment and precision. Scenes of your life, fishing, hunting, inspecting fields, are painted lovingly beside images of servants bringing offerings you may need in the afterlife. Bread, beer, honey, linen, incense, and rare unguents from Punt. Hieroglyphs snake along the corridor walls, not as decoration, but as protection. They are spells utterances from the Book of the Dead, from the pyramid texts, from the coffin texts, crafted to guard your soul, guide your ka, and grant your ba the freedom to return each night and rest peacefully in the tomb. But a tomb is not enough. The body must be preserved. And so, you have arranged for the sacred process of mummification, a ritual lasting 70 days, undertaken by the most skilled embalmers. They will not say your name aloud. They will cover their faces. They will place amulets within your wrappings, on your chest and throat and wrists, each symbol a divine lock. A talisman to shield you from serpents, chaos, spirits, and the trial of judgment itself. Your organs, liver, lungs, stomach, intestines will be placed in canopic jars, each under the protection of one of Horus's sons. Your heart, unless tradition shifts in your lifetime, will remain in your chest, for it is your heart that shall be weighed by Anubis against the feather of Mat. If it is light, you will be welcomed into the field of reeds. If heavy, devoured by Ammit. But you do not fear this, because you have prepared. In life, you gave to the poor. You made offerings at the proper festivals. You upheld the festivals of the gods. You paid your temple dues and never cheated the scales. You lived in balance. And now, your afterlife shall be no less grand. In your tomb, a carved doorway spalls doors, through which your spirit may pass to receive offerings. Statues of you, painted lifelike, await you in niches. Servant figurines shaptis line the shelves, ready to answer work orders in your place should Osiris command labor in the next world. You will not lift a hand in death. Offerings shall be made daily at your tomb. Your eldest son, or if childless, a trusted heir, will bring bread, beer, onions, and metriel or symbolic. The rituals will be recited. Your name will be spoken. For to be remembered is to be alive. And if your descendants are faithful, if your cult remains funded, if your tomb remains undisturbed, you may endure for 1,000 years. But eternity is fragile. Already, you are aware of the thieves that stalk tomb corridors, of the poor who chisel away at mastaba doors, seeking wealth or simply shelter. You have hired guards, of course. You have written curses. You have bribed temple officials to ensure that your resting place is sealed and sacred. And yet, one day, all this may crumble. Still, you build. Still, you carve your name on every wall. Still, you commission scribes to write your autobiography, how you brought justice, how you built granaries, how you loved your wife and honored your king. Still, you inscribe prayers, not only to the gods, but to future visitors. You ask them to read your name, to say it aloud, to pour a cup of water on your behalf. May the reader speak my name. May my ka be refreshed. And now, old and full of years, you stand before your tomb, its lintel freshly painted, the door sealed with plaster and sacred sigils. The sun lowers behind the cliffs. You feel no fear. You wear linen, yes, but you are wrapped already in peace. You are leaving not with sorrow, but with dignity. You have curated your own eternity, painted your heaven in pigment and prose, and handed your soul into the arms of the gods with deliberate care. When the end comes, it is not a departure, it is a crowning. The tomb is sealed, the prayers are said, the offerings begin, and in the duat, where rivers glow and reeds whisper your name, your spirit steps forward radiant, light and unburdened into a world beyond time. You are not forgotten. You are forever.